learned yesterday. So for the recording, I want to introduce Kyle Christensen. Kyle is a business coach, and I learned yesterday for the first time that he was actually a certified traction coach, which I never knew. So awesome, Kyle. I'll leave that to you to introduce yourself.
And Alex,
Yeah.
can you stop sharing your screen so we get full live, Kyle?
Yeah, let me do that.
Full live
Kyle.
Kyle, man. Does anyone want that? Yeah, thank you, Alex. I've been in the MSP industry since about 2007, 2008 through my own adventures, and as well as a turnaround operator, bringing an MSP through fast-paced scaling. Like you mentioned, I was in some peer groups through HTG as well as an EOS certified implementer. I co-founded a little consulting firm in the ConnectWise space called Sierra Pacific Group, where we were are the largest consulting firm for ConnectWise partners. And I also actively do business coaching for MSPs looking to grow and scale through their glass ceilings. So, right, we all know those glass ceilings. It's 2.5 million, 4 million, 5 million, and those guys that want to go through it fast. And it's a fun topic that you and I were talking about yesterday, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, we decided we were going to hop on and talk for 15 minutes, and what did it take us, an hour and a half?
An hour and a half.
So it was a very direct route to the conversation, but we're going to try and get through it in a little bit less time today.
Yeah, especially right when we start to think of both of these seats being, at the end of the day, they're both cost centers,
Yep.
right? And a lot of traditional stuff. And Alex, maybe you can kind of set the foundation of what, right? I haven't been on all these calls, and I know life cycles. You guys are the leader in the whole vCIO mission. What do you typically see as account management in the vCIO? Where do you see that line or that partition?
I think that's a great point, and it's a problem I've been trying to get the right answer to, and I don't know that I don't know that I have the perfect answer. And it's one of those things that I've been chasing for a while, and instead of standing up and on top of my soapbox and pretending like I know what I'm talking about, I just keep asking people the question and getting different takes on it. And it turns out I haven't found the person who has the exact answer yet. But like we talked about it yesterday, I think the account manager has some responsibilities that are more along the lines of commissioned or compensated around performance of their sales book, or growing their accounts, or retaining their accounts, right? I almost see them as a pseudo sales role, right? But it's sales to your existing client base. They're turning over orders, processing sales orders and upgrades and recommendations and all of that kind of stuff. And the vCIO, I feel like the minute you put a quota on them, you actually break what they're supposed to do, because they're supposed to be a C-level executive at one of your customers. And none of your C-level, if you went into any of your customers and grabbed one of their C-levels and said, I'm going to give you a sales quota for next month, they would throw you out on your ass. So it's this thing where we call it a vCIO, but it's really a fractional CIO. And this is a person who is a member of the leadership team at your client, and saddling them with the sales obligation, or even with that role, is almost counterproductive to what they're supposed to be doing. And that's where this one breaks my brain. And I'm still not sure that I know the answer, but I think that the answer is that all too often we have folks who are doing account management, and we're calling it a vCIO function. And I think in the space we have we don't know the difference between an MSP or an MSSP. We don't know the difference between a vCIO or a vCISO. We invent these marketing terms to go put them out there. I don't care what you call it. I think there's two distinctly different roles that we need to think about in the organization where you are both of those humans. I think you've got to very deliberately take off one hat to put on the other sometimes, and almost operate against yourself, which sounds like terrible advice from a business coach, which is why I get to say it, not you.
And it's funny because whenever I'm working with MSPs, and right, we're building out those seats, like where am I sitting as a person? It's too easy to be like, hey, you're going to go sit in this seat and that seat, and not really pay too much attention, because you just want to fill the need that's going to be from missing that person, right? And we never take a step back sometimes and go, hey, is this a left brain, right brain type function? Or I'm a huge fan of Gallup. They have a kind of a personality test that a lot of big enterprise companies use called Gallup, or Clifton Strengths. It used to be called Gallup Strength Finders, so I've been screwing up that terminology. And it's a really interesting concept, because the idea is your strengths are what your company should play to.
Mhm.
Right. In Western culture, we're so much the let's take our weaknesses and let's be macho and let's find a way to overcome these weaknesses. But if we really think about it, they're a weakness because I have no passion for it. I have no drive for it. My brain doesn't have the logic that just naturally, right? I have that innate ability to solve these problems. And I liken it sometimes to how many times have we heard, oh, how do I get my engineer to do paperwork? How do I get them to write this process out? How do I get them to, finish their timesheets on time? And no one's asked the question or really designed the problem of, well, is that just something that innately engineers just suck at, right? They're all built for reverse engineering. We're built for problem solving. And we also have a culture where things need to be solved fast, right?
Mhm.
And move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. So I always like to ask the problem, right, of account management versus how you described vCIO. To me, there's that hunter-gatherer, that quick win, that I need to
Marnie likes to call them coin operated, right?
coin operator, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a transactional aspect to an account manager.
Yep.
vCIO, though, there isn't a quick win or a coin operated function to the relationship because it's going to change every day. Or, the CFO is going to walk to the vCIO and say, what about this? What about that? That's not transactional. How do
No,
you
it's
start
not.
to account for
And
that?
they're doing long-term strategy planning, which again, anti-transactional.
It is. And when you have these anti-transactional seats, it's one of those fun things to start going, how do I put a score on this? And whenever I'm doing budgeting or forecasting in these MSPs that want to move fast, I go back to basics. Where does this person going to land either my business strategy or my value proposition to my customers, which ultimately ends up where are they on the P&L?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the only way you can look at it from a traditional aspect. And let's be quite frank, that's the only way that I know, am I going to be able to afford the time for that value proposition? I think the first thing I asked you the other day, Alex, or yesterday when we were talking about this, my brain went with how you're explaining vCIO and how I know most MSPs like to price their packaging
Mm-hmm.
and their units. How are they going? It needs to be a separate thing. It almost like needs to be charged on its own if you truly want to work it in the way that you're explaining it to.
And I admitted when you said that, and I'll admit it right here in front of everybody, I gave it away as a service,
That's how
as a
most of us do
strategic
it. I
service,
did it
right?
at my MSP that way.
And I think it's how most people are doing it, and I think we've been wrong this whole time.
And that's such a fun conversation. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we have enough time to talk about how could we do a whole value map. And I would, or we can, if everyone wants to go down this path, because I'm even getting antsy in my chair right now. I love the idea here, and I've had this not tinfoil hat, but Kyle Nostradamus thing going on lately, to where I think the industry is evolving into a place to where I don't like the term virtual CIO. I like to look at what accountants and what financial advisors did in like 2008, 2009, where as companies started to save costs, right, they looked at all the expensive salaries that they had in their company, and CFOs for a lot of small businesses were one of those line items. And what happened around 08, 09? The fractional CFO started to pop up. And fractional CFO completely changed the industry, right? Because these companies that are $2-3 million can now get a $250,000 a year financial advisor type person on their payroll.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said it yesterday, Alex, and it's been sticking in my head. I think we failed at calling it vCIO.
I'm convinced that, and when we're an industry that's terrible at marketing, right? EDR, MDR, XDR, ZDR, whatever we suck at marketing. Let's just admit it. We should have called it a fractional CIO. And I think there's an opportunity for MSPs who want to go say, we don't do vCIO, we sell fractional CIO. And I think using that to differentiate your lumped in and also product, where I'm disincentivized, and we'll step into this, I'm disincentivized as an MSP to give you vCIO services because I included it in some with some, non-defined number of units on a bill that now my goal is to really run up my profit margin on, and now I have to give you less VCIO so that I can be profitable. Like, that doesn't work. When we bake it into flat rate services, it's broke. And if we do it as a fractional service, we go out and say, at your size, Mr. Customer, you need 12 hours a month of CIO services, and we're going to bill that to you at, $5,000, and whatever the math problem is. I think all of a sudden it starts to work differently there. And it's really a differentiator, because some of the things you said to me, how many VCIOs are going out to their client's office and saying, you paid for 12 hours and I'm only going to use 6 of them, so I'm going to go spend the other 6 with your team to learn what they do and see how we could further automate or improve their business process.
Totally, right? And that is where I think those are the beginning frameworks of going to a traditional scorecard of, how do I know if my vCIO is doing a good job for accountability sakes? And I think it's a simple exercise. So one of the talks I'm doing too at IT Nation, one of the ones I'm doing is deconstructing managed services profitability. Because, and I'm doing this from a zeitgeist perspective of what the majority of MSPs, how they structure this. And if you don't mind, I want to share a whiteboard, because I think this is an easy way to kind of conceptualize the problem. So, and we're going to play with some fun numbers here. So everyone, there's no doctorate in the numbers I'm using. So, right, let's just think of a traditional P&L, right?
Your math will be checked on the fly, by the way. Marnie's already.
I know. I'm sure that the numbers I pick, people are like, that was.
Marnie was a math teacher, so you're being graded.
It keeps me on my toes. Let's see how good I can do this, right? So we're going to pick simply, what's an average MRR that's healthy? 5 grand, 10 grand? What are we up to these days? Let's pick one.
Somebody throw one out there. What do you guys see in average MRR today? 5 grand.
5 in the chat.
All
5
right.
grand? I like it. Easy number. Kyle has a less chance of.
Yeah.
Marty jumping on me, right?
So smart Alex says 1,783, and you were like,
right.
Well, yeah. And right now, just because Marnie, you're making me nervous, I'm gonna bring my calculator up. So, right, $5,000 MRR. This is per month, right? And a healthy service margin that I see a lot of my clients that I coach through, right? They want anywhere between 55 and 60% gross margin on their managed service contracts, right? You're going, oh man, that's a lot, but that's what the goal is. And we're talking, let's not get into the conversation of blended versus non-blended. Let's keep this simple, right? So we have COGS, we have profit. And Marnie, just because you're challenging me here, I'm just going to use a calculator, right? That's 2 grand in COGS, right? So we're making 3 grand from a gross profitability perspective on this client. If we are at best in class gross profitability, right? We're in a bubble right now. Now, what I think is important here, Alex, and what we're really talking about, right, is this guy right here. And whenever I'm training service managers, right, the biggest thing that you'll hear me see, and you'll see this at IT Nation on a giant slide, and all it's going to say is service managers manage service. At the core of what they do.
It seems so very obvious.
Right. It's so obvious. But, and this is the fun thing. I've done this talk a couple times now. I'll say, hey, everyone, just start shouting out KPIs for your service managers. Let's do it here, right? What do you guys hold your service managers accountable for? I wish I had asked that before I said they manage service, but.
Don't be quiet, guys. Give them some feedback. One of our big ones was kill rate.
Yeah.
So
happy customers, happy managed services customer outcome.
CSAT, ticket close, right? SLA.
Response times,
right? And these are pretty typical. Now, one of the things that I really work with my clients on is redefining what the word profitability means, because for a lot of us, profitability is a result. And we have a lot of our KPIs as a bottom-up logic to profitability is what's left over, right? If I ask the question, what's profitability? People go, well, it's rev minus expenses equals profit. Well, the way I manage a lot of my MSPs or the MSPs that I ran, there's a fantastic book out there and the name is slipping me right now because I'm on the spotlight, and I'll put it in the chat later. What?
Is it the Pumpkin Plan?
No, it's not the pumpkin plan.
Okay.
I refer to it as profit per X, but I forgot what the actual,
Okay.
it's a Jim Collins thing. But to me, and where I started to really nerd out is, well, what if profitability was an expectation and not a result? And because we're engineers, right, we can actually change that. And rather than it being, oh, why is this not writing? Come on, Apple. Oh, because I have the eraser on. How do I go to a pen? Come on, there we go. Rather than it being rev subtract expense equals profit. And this is where you guys all that are in your budget sessions right now should be switching this to. What if it was, because we're engineers, rev minus expenses.
Kyle's having some connectivity issues, or I am.
No, I think there was like a feedback.
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, cool. So, and this is where when I'm doing budgets and expenses and building out EOS scorecards and all this stuff, I start to change the logic a little bit. And this plays into the AM versus vCIO conversation, I swear. We're going to get there. But I think this sets a little bit of a foundation that when you're running best in class, you have to treat your COGS or your expenses as a fixed asset if you're truly going to manage your company to hit a profitability goal. So your service manager is essentially getting back on track, right? This $2,000 COG, this is that pie that you were, I think, starting to talk about, Alex, where this, I get $2,000 and hopefully my share is going to update, right?
If we're actually billing for our vCIO, then
Oh,
we
we're
have
doing that,
revenue
right?
to assign to it to take expenses away from. And I think too often we get to a place where we can't even bill it out, right?
Well, that's where we're getting here,
Can't
right?
break
If you
it out.
start to
Yeah.
think about it, I have to fit in a single month $2,000 into providing service for my client, which means, right, I have RMM here, I have Lifecycle Insights here, I have help desk here, right? And you guys kind of get the picture, right? Like I have to, as a service manager, now fill all of these things, which sometimes leads me into this one that's help desk, right? That might be, if your average burden per hour, let's say, is $40 an hour, $400 a month. If they had a, let's say if it's 10 hours or something like that, right? I can only maybe spend 15 hours now a month on this client for help desk that's paying me $5,000 a month. So where does that leave? Does that leave, obviously this isn't to scale or nothing, and you can model this if you truly want. That might leave you like 4 hours to do vCIO for a client in a month, 1 hour a week.
And depending on what their help desk interaction is, now moves the needle on how much vCIO you can afford to give them, which I think is where we get into, we're competing with ourselves to provide a service that should stand on its own.
Oh, completely. Because what ends up being the problem is a lot of best-in-class service managers, VP of service, operations directors, whatever the title is, and the way I structure it for a lot of my clients, is a service manager typically has a variable pay component in best-in-class MSPs where if my expectation is, let's say, 50% or 60% in the terms of this model, and I don't know why my whiteboard's not updating, I apologize, guys. There it goes. So let's say it's 50%. Well, usually that variable pay component has a kicker to where if I finish at 55%, I get a portion of that 5% of profitability that I went above and beyond expectation, right? That's a true profit sharing model.
Mm-hmm.
So my service manager, if, right, like you said, Alex, if he spent, rather than 15, he went and something happened, something blew up, we're not efficient, right? He did 20 hours. Now that just basically completely eliminated his incentive for a high paid vCIO, right? Because they're not going to be no $40 an hour.
Right.
To even do vCIO that month. So there's two ways to fix this problem, right? There's either one, charge more, or two, do less.
And what I'm hearing is vCIO is not a function of the support of the service desk, which I think most folks on this call already know that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we move it out from under a service manager who's responsible for really all of the revenue coming in from that client, we get yet another conflict.
Exactly. and there's beautiful peer accountability in that, right? If it doesn't report to the service manager, because then at least you know there's some earnest honesty in your team, kind of like how an MSP and an MSSP under a same umbrella could operate, but they're still sharing that same $2,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the question then becomes, right, is does it become, and there's no, I don't, this is the beauty of business, and this is where I have fun. And this is Kyle in his honest element working with an MSP that wants to do things a little bit differently, right? Does vCIO then become let me add another $2,000 a month for vCIO that becomes an additional line item? Or, right, the other way you could do it is it a bundle, right, where now it becomes a
Right.
increase per unit to accommodate what we need. Now we're getting a little off track of the initial question of AM versus vCIO, right? But I think this is important.
I think Alex is going to drag us right back there if you read his comment.
Sorry, I don't have the comments up. Can you help me out
That's
here?
okay. He says, interesting line of thought that we go over a lot in our company is that we have to have account management and vCIO services. It's not optional, only because we want to work with tech forward clients, or at least clients that are looking to proactively change and grow. So what he goes on a little bit here, but what he's basically reminding us is that account management, we've talked about how to pay for vCIO and that it is actually not a service thing. But let's talk about where account management belongs in the P&L, because it's also not service.
Yes, exactly. And you said something earlier about MSPs. We suck at sales and marketing and putting things in boxes and packages. And this is one of those beautiful things that I think us as vendors or more people that were from other industries can bring in, because account management is very much a sales role in a business. And what you typically see, let me get a new whiteboard so I can bring up a new P&L. How do I do that?
While you're doing that, the rest of Alex's comment was that's because overwhelmingly we see our clients that have been engaged in QBRs for over a year have less support needs and other things like that. So essentially, your clients who show up and participate in the process are easier to support. And I think
Tricia said there's a direct correlation between number of QBRs delivered and number of quotes, accepted.
Deep down, I'm sure we all know that. Like our gut tells us that, but it's interesting if you can start to compare the math. And Kyle, some of that is behind your little bar on the left over here.
Sorry about that. Let me
presentation bar. I don't know if you can scale things or slide things or.
Yeah, I think I can do some cool stuff with this. There we go.
Hey, there we go.
Profit, right? So, and I think we have to zoom a little bit out for account management on this one. So we're gonna have to talk about the MSP as a whole, and it'll make sense here in a second, because what is really different when it comes to, is my math right, Marnie? Is that 60%?
We're missing a zero, but the math is right.
Oh, there we go. Right. So what's important about this, right, is when we're talking about account management, there's not a one-to-one relationship in business like it would be with a operations or a service team. It's not X vCIOs to X number of customers. It's not how many help desk people to endpoints. And the way that you typically see this is you have your revenue, your COGS, which give you your profitability. And then your profitability in a mature business has a percentage budget for your sales and marketing. So, all right, you guys have all seen a P&L, right? So we have sales and marketing. And normally you'll see anything between 10 and 12% for sales and marketing for a business that's trying to grow. Now, for those of you that are like, oh, I'm going after EBITDA, I'm trying to sell, this is not that same type of problem. That's a different strategy.
You guys are down at 8%, and that's just
you guys are going down to 8%, 7%, 6%. By the way, that's a fun conversation because they're diametrically opposed, yet some people try to do both and it never works. But for my MSPs that are trying to grow and get through that glass ceiling, it takes $1 to make $1. That's age-old logic. So I'm going to use easy math, or Marnie's going to completely flame me. So let's say it's 10%. So right now I have $300,000 for my entire year to spend on all of my sales and marketing. That's people, that's conferences, that's ads, SEOs, the whole 9 yards. Now, when you think about that, right, I can't have a one-to-one relationship now because it's only 10%. So my account manager, who is supposed to be hitting a quota or contributing to a quota, I'm going to get there in a second, they now are looking for to close deals. So, right, if I can only spend $300,000 as a sales executive, and let's say that this 5 million was a 10% growth. The year before I had finished at, what would that be, 4.6, and I'm trying to hit that 5 million mark, I need to now add $400,000 to the bottom line of my MSP, or the top line, excuse me, not the bottom line. So that's roughly, right, there's some deals that are going to have to be upsold, cross-sold, whatever. So, right, that's a $500,000 a year quota that I can only use $300,000 to make. If I'm a vCIO and I have to close, say you, right, most MSPs only have 1 or 2 people in sales, I have to close $500,000 in a year on top of what I did the year before.
Yep.
How am I going to have time to go nurture a client, attend board meetings, look at how their systems communicate, look at all their compliance needs, when I have to find a way with a budget to hit $500,000 in increased sales? I'm going to have a motivation in that board meeting, ain't I?
Oh yeah.
Hell, Mr. Client, I know you only needed a $3,000 server, but this $7,000 server, man. We've all seen those guys.
Yep.
And I saw something in the chat that caught my eye. What are you assuming is the actual purpose of the vCIO if my MSP is doing its job? QBRs, customer meetings. Yep, looking at, right, there is a component here to where then, right, and Alex, help me out here, but I think with Steve, where you're trying to come from here is, so Steve, are you trying to mention in here that you're not seeing the correlation in the vCIO role that we're describing here? Or are you more focused that account management's more important?
I think what he's saying is his VCIs are actually doing VCIO work and not account management.
Okay, cool.
But feel free to correct us, and you can come off mute if you want to chat, Steve. That's fine. So, what we're talking about here is a very high level, vague concept around what we see in the space, which is vCIO and account management confused. Stephen, what are you seeing?
I guess where I'm coming from is, if I'm doing as an MSP, an account rep, right? You know what I mean? I go on site, I'm looking at, the reports coming out of my PSA, I'm looking at my management, I'm looking at equipment age and, this, that, and the other. And if I have that relationship, that good relationship with my customer, which I'm sure we all do, what is the point to having a vCIO role? Because the customer is going to go, hey, we want to take our business in this direction, and I'm going to use that as a sales opportunity, and I'm going to go source it out and come up with the solution, and I'm going to bill them for it. So I just don't understand, the true role as it's being described versus an account manager. Right?
So I think that, yeah, let me start with that one, and then we'll let anybody else who has an opinion jump in. But number one, I think it hasn't been clearly defined and explained in the space, and that leaves a lot of folks to try and figure it out ourselves. What I am seeing across a large number of MSPs is that there are regulated or at least under the watchful eye type businesses that have to have some sort of a CIO role, whether as a board requirement, whether as a requirement of regulation or some other reason that they have to have this person in there. And when that person has a conflict, when they are really a sales guy wearing the wrong hat, is where we start to see the problem, which is the vCIO is just here to sell me something. They're not actually helping the company build its strategy that helps the company ring the cash register. And then the customer feels always sold to because they don't have that outlet that is just a strategic person to help them talk through, how do we ring the cash register faster? How do we ring the cash register smoother? How do we survive a recession in 2023 while still being able to ring the cash register, but have to cut 3 jobs or 5 jobs or 10% of jobs or whatever. They don't have somebody neutral that they can go to have that conversation with. And I think that's the difference. And as you work your way up the client stack, when you get into more mature clients, they're going to have an expectation of that, or if not a requirement for that. And financial institutions, for example, are starting to be required by their auditors to have someone with cybersecurity experience, a CISO, CIO, whatever you want to call it, on their board.
And I kind of want to add to that a little bit, because I think, Steve, the way that you're phrasing kind of
to be clear, you're doing exactly what I did with my MSP.
No,
so.
and what I want to go to is, Steve, right? You're totally on point to where there's still that innate thing in our heads that thinks vCIO means leads, vCIO means quotes, vCIO means putting boxes in the client's office. Where if we really break down, if we go to any Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company that has a really mature CIO, a CIO isn't there just shopping all day. They're not on a board just like going on Amazon or going on websites just buying stuff for the company. That's not what a CIO does.
They drive change.
I'm sorry?
They drive change.
Yes, they drive change in the business. And this is where Alex, we kind of talked about it. CIOs and what we do as MSPs, as computers and hardware becomes less and less and less relevant, we are going to be those people in this industry that are going to be looking at how SaaS applications work with each other, how the security of those access policies work, how things like identity management and HR as a service, which is something that MSPs don't really talk about with companies like Okta and Centrify. Those become such a more pivotal thing for us as businesses. And I saw yesterday, or actually might have been a week ago now, that's how my time frames are working, where a CEO of a giant marketing agency, they're like $50 million, literally put on her LinkedIn page, I need a consultant that is technical that can help us use HubSpot. She listed out all the SaaS apps they have because they want to find a way to make them all work all more efficiently together. How do they make their keystroke efficiency bring them a higher ROI, which puts more money on the bottom line? That is what a CIO is trying to do. And as us as MSPs keep getting focused on dropping boxes and writing quotes, then you know what's going to happen? They're going to get a real CIO, or they're going to find a fractional CIO from another enterprise, and he's going to dictate to us MSPs on what we're going to do and what we're going to write quotes for.
And there are some really big organizations that all they do is fractional CIO work, right? And they're going to come in here and sit across the table from you and hold you accountable, as opposed to being on your side. Scott said something that just, I needed to hear it said that simply, which was CIOs drive change. And if you think about account management, account managers drive very small, very iterative change, right? Buy the next thing to be aligned with my stack. Buy the next thing to check a checkbox on a compliance form. And CIOs, I think, and then retain the client, right? Their job really is to very incrementally, very slowly over time, iteratively improve that client, keep them happy, keep them ringing the cash register, keep them under contract, make sure that the renewals go through without a problem. They're churn avoidance people whose job is also to make a little bit more money on the client every time, right? That CIO is trying to drive much bigger change, like you were talking about with the HR platforms, with Okta, with how can we automate and get your ERP system to talk to other tools and other things. It's
our chance to control the narrative, right?
Yep.
And this is the thing that's so kind of empowering.
And I've heard what Trisha said before too. Trisha says their account managers actually support their vCIOs. I've heard a successful MSPs say, an account manager, a vCIO can oversee the accounts for multiple account managers, and that those account managers can help reinforce the change that the CIO is driving.
Well, the account manager should be going to the vCIO saying, hey, I want to sell you on this new endpoint or this thing in my stack. They shouldn't be going to the CFO, right? If you're truly a fractional person sitting in that seat, being that person of change, being that person of information, you are almost a counterbalance, like an MSP and an MSSP, right? Where one doesn't care how the technology works, one cares about how the technology works, right? There should be that internal strife, where the account manager has to hit a quota and the vCIO is saying, get the hell out of here, Right now, they're not hitting their budget or they're not hitting their own quotas. They're going to laugh us out of the room if you try to force them to buy X, Y, or Z.
So I always trained our consulting teams. I did this role in ed tech, but I was an ed consultant instead of vCIO, right? So I wasn't the tech person, but I had the same roles in the education as the people I was talking to. And I always said two things. One, I was a good English to English translator because I could translate the business of tech to the business of education and back and forth, which I think is part of the vCIO piece. But the other part was that, oh man, why is the other part going to leave me right now? That I was both I was an employee. I advocated for both, right? I was advocating for the company. I was advocating for the client. But when I was talking to the client, I was a client advocate for their business needs, not about what I needed to sell them. But they structured compensation. I fought tooth and nail to not be a part of the sales org. And I said, don't give me a sales quota. And I don't even want to know how expensive stuff is. And I never knew. So when people would say like, okay, so I feel like we're going to need this part of your solution for the stack. How much is that? I said, I have no idea. You're going to have to talk to an accountant. You're going to have to talk to your sales manager. I'm just showing you the ways to solve this problem. And you've made these. So go talk to someone that can tell you that.
And so Tim and I just did a webinar on policy last Tuesday, I don't know, earlier this week. And one of the things we talked about in policy was being able to write policy in your client's language, right? I feel like the vCIO has to be able to understand how the client business works, like what Marnie was just saying, and speak to them in their language about their business, right?
Well, and have the time to learn about their business. I mean, there should be an entire onboarding process. And for any of you that have worked with a fractional CFO, right, they spend like a month in your QuickBooks and writing up spreadsheets and doing things like live plan to figure out your own forecasting before they even consult with you. And I think this becomes an interesting dynamic. And we kind of started to talk about this a little bit yesterday, Alex, where you're almost managing the vCIO like another professional service position, like a fractional CFO. Think about big financial firms, like the bookkeeper and the fractional CFO, they're different departments. They are different cost centers with different outcomes that are expected. And the way that they typically manage, like a lawyer would be managed, is what is his billable percentage, right? It's a high billable because it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're working with that client or you're working on clients. Now, if I only have a little fraction of that managed service pie, and sometimes the service manager is going to throw it out the window because help desk screwed up, I can't be a high billable vCIO. I'm going to go find another seat like account management or like service management or whatever. And
there was a backup provider a couple of years ago that I heard pitch directly to some customers, and I forget what event I was at. I think it was a local like chamber thing, but this backup provider came in and said, your IT company should not manage your backups. If they screw up, you need to know that somebody was actually doing your backups, that they were test restored, that all that the same set of credentials don't attach to the two things. They had this whole big sales pitch around driving that wedge between the MSP and the customer so that they could go be a direct backup provider. And I heard it and I thought, if I was a customer, I might find that appealing, and I better be prepared if they ever come knocking on one of my customers' doors. What I'm getting from today's conversation is that every last one of us should be prepared to have the conversation when a vCIO only company or fractional CIO company comes and knocks on your biggest client's door and says, would you like a CIO in here helping you guide strategic trajectory and helping you hold your MSP accountable? Because that's the way the sales pitch is going to come across.
And if it's not the fractional CIO, I can guarantee the CFO is already having that similar conversation. If we get into the whole recession conversation and start to, right, get prepared for winter, right? They're already looking at where can they become more efficient with their, like your client has their own efficiencies, right? Where can we do our own reduction? But on the other side, let's have a positive on this one, Alex. Like, you know, I'll be your glass half full on this one. We have the opportunity to control that narrative. We can be that person saying, hey, here's a way that we can add 2% to the bottom line, Mr. Customer, if we finally pay for that CRM to ERP syncing service. Mm-hmm. It will save you 3 clicks per employee per month, per week, per day.
Yep.
So now on the account management side, and I don't know how deep we want to go into it, right? And going into quotas and
well, I think we should talk about it, because one of the things that we said was a vCIO really should be a billable resource, right? They are a COG, cost of goods, right? That's where they fall on the P&L. when we were just $1 million shop, a full-time account manager could pay for themselves at my MSP.
And that's right. I mean, if you look at a P&L, that's usually why it's 10%, because that'll sustain that
Yeah.
if they hit quota.
And all of a sudden, account management really was, it made me money. And it was a hard thing for me to figure out that I could hand off and use to make me money. And that was just because I'm hard-headed and I thought nobody could do it as well as me. But once we were able to build a process around it, I turned it over and it literally made money while I went and worked on other things like outside sales. And it allowed me to continue to sell and grow the business and not have to be involved in the day-to-day account management piece. But that means that there's got to be some sort of accountability there. If you're an account manager and there is no quota, at least on retention and account growth, right? Your accounts have to grow at least as much as inflation. You've got to have some sort of account growth every year. You've got to have a retention goal. Wes Spencer gave me the best answer for account management retention, and that was no unexpected churn, right? If you're going to lose a customer, your account manager darn well better know their customers well enough that they see it coming. They have given leadership the opportunity to avoid it, right? Let's get in front of the customer. Let's perform CPR, do whatever we got to do. And so that there should be no unplanned or unexpected churn, and that we should be able to actually drive new revenue by increasing our sales. If you're $1 million shop and you get 8-10% growth in your account base every year, just out of an account manager, that really pays for that account manager very, very well before they sell their first project.
No, and that's the whole thing is we're honestly getting to a conversation about budgeting and forecasting without realizing it, because we are so, it's the E-myth at the end of the day, right? The practitioner is trying to share their craft and they don't know anything about business fundamentals. And when you know your churn, usually it's by units or by revenue, somewhere in between, usually like 7 and 10% if you're immature. But you should also know your growth rates. And if you know these numbers and you know your quotas, that should allow you to also understand where your COGS are going to increase. Kind of to your point, Alex, of right now I shouldn't have this conversation of, oh, I'm afraid of new sales or an account manager hitting a quota or getting a quota because I don't want them to sell faster than my operations team can mature. But if I'm forecasting that growth,
yeah,
and I know what churn I'm going to have, then operations, you just need to worry about recruiting. You have a recruitment problem, not a growth problem.
Well, and if you think it from a account manager perspective, if they're growing their accounts, those are the easiest to grow accounts. They're the easiest on operations because you're already there. You're already installed. Like your tools already exist. What's the worst thing that happens? They hire a few new employees.
Well,
you're not going to have to hire employees to grow that piece of business.
You said something important in there about growing with inflation. Your account managers are making sure you can do things like cost of living increases, because if you're not increasing your average MRR per customer with your COG increases every year for cost of living adjustments, that is where your profitability starts to slip.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are so against yearly increases. Everyone's afraid of it. But if I'm going to have to pay my employee another 8% this year because, right, cost of living went up, inflation went up, my customers need to increase it. And honestly, if they walk, that's fine. I can have churn that is accounted for because I can't afford to dip. Again, this is going to profitability being an expectation, not a result, right? I have to have my 55% or my 60%. So if my customer is not willing to pay those rates because I can't show that value, which, right, we can get into a whole different conversation on that, then I need to be willing to not deliver that service at now a loss in terms of my profit expectations.
Yep.
And your account managers, this is where quotas become important, or things like KPIs of average MRR value or average MRR value increase. You can kind of model those a few different ways. Of my lifetime value of my client annually needs to increase 8% per year, not including their own organic growth.
Yep.
So it's a fun one. And this is, by the way, for any of you that are service leadership or do any of the sleek assessments, this is why budgeting and forecasting is like, I think it's like what, 1.2, 1.3 that it increases
early, yeah,
on the maturity scale. It is the largest thing that Paul Dipple put into the sleek tool for OML because of how important and how much us as MSPs fail to do this practice. And then all of a sudden, this is where our logic of I can't hire an account manager because I can't afford to hire an extra body. So my vCIO is now going to sit in the same seat as account management because he's just a body that has free time because I couldn't afford to allow him to spend 3 hours this month on a client.
Yep. And if we start to add vCIO as a service above and beyond what we're doing, it makes it even easier when we start to budget to see where the money comes from to pay that human, to hire that dedicated human to do that job.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I foresee MSPs being nothing but fractional CIOs with things like offshore help desk. It's getting to a point where I don't care if this thing breaks, Mr. CFO, go buy another one or go order one on Amazon. I'm done making 8% margin dropping boxes from, pick my distribution person here. Yeah. Those days are gone. Right? It's all about the service margin. The service margin is always going to be your most profitable, but also your most dangerous component if you do not strategize for it correctly.
Yeah. So I'm interested, after hearing Kyle and I rant over this for the better part of 40 minutes, has anybody here changed their tune on vCIO? Is anybody considering changing the way that you offer it, changing the way you bill for it? Putting a deeper divide between account management and vCIO? Do you think we're just crazy? All of those are potentially realistic.
And he specifically means based on this conversation, not on other things you might have heard either of
You knew I was
do
crazy.
today.
Yeah. Does this make you think I'm any more or less crazy?
Yeah. Jeff, I appreciate the laugh on that because
Well, not only that, right? Is it concerning? Does it make you feel like there's so much more work to do? Is it defeating or empowering?
And is there something we need to do for you guys to help expand on this? Like, happy to be given homework as much as give homework when we send you guys home to think about stuff like this.
This validates for me what we're doing, and that is it's a separate billable service. Our vCIO is someone who is out in front of the customer delivering compliance, delivering regulatory services for financial customers, for healthcare customers, for customers that have those very specific needs is the way we've structured it. We complicate things even further, or I would throw another wrench in this program by saying the people who deliver what the lifecycle tool does and everything wrapped around that complete ecosystem, we call customer strategy advisor.
I love that title. Is that essentially account management?
I suppose it is, but it is delivered very much on purpose, without a quota, without commission, because that again separates the relationship, right? If I, as a customer strategy advisor, am delivering quotes and delivering proposals and having conversations about how much things cost, then I'm breaking the nature of driving strategy.
So who in your organization owns retention and cross-sell upsell?
So we've got a mix of hunters and farmers.
Okay.
From a sales perspective.
And you guys are a larger MSP, to put it in perspective. You guys are large.
You've got 125 employees. We're a $35 million organization. So yeah.
So for those of you that have 12 people, don't try and put yourself in those shoes, right? Let's just on that OML scale, right?
Right.
It's and I think it was Scott that you were just saying, I love that title, customer strategy advisor. I'm a unicorn in my company. I would call us a mid-range MSP. We're 50 people. Where part of the reason we jumped in with Lifecycle was because we liked the reports. We were using another platform that just was making me do way too much work. And I do a little vCIO. I do a little bit of sales. I do have a quota, but I'm the one, kind of the way Marnie described it. She mentioned that, she took layman's terms and turned it to technical, or technical to layman's terms. That's my job, is to sit down with the customer, understand their business, and we break it in a different way because our account managers are now relationship success managers. And I actually had a boss discussion with my CEO, and who happens to be my direct boss. and we were looking for a different title other than technical account manager. And I really like that customer strategy advisor, although I don't think we're big enough yet to break the role into two where I don't have the sales function of it. But again, I'm not driven by quota. I'm driven by getting the customer their problem solved. So thank you for that, Scott. That was, I really like that name.
Yeah,
We
I
just-
chuckled a little bit over catch and kill versus clean and fry, but you know, you know, there's a lot of good conversation to be had around how all this breaks out. I would say don't get so hung up on the name of the title, but on the, do we have a human whose job is to not carry a quota and maybe be a little adversarial to the MSP in general, in the client's favor, to make sure that we're delivering the strategy that they need. And adversarial might be a strong word, but
No, I
Yeah.
think you're right on with that, Alex. I agree with you. If you're going to have someone have more than one seat or wear more than one hat, I honestly think your sales rep should sit more in the account management seat than your VCIO should. Just
I've
because
argued
they
for that
free
for a
time.
long time, because it's really easy for an account manager to do sales, because they can walk out to a client and say what it feels like to be my customer is, because I do all the account management. I know this, right?
Well, and if the budget for that person is to hit a quota, and I get it, we don't like the word quota, but at the end of the day, we like the word growth. So you got to have it.
And we
one
like the
way or
word
the other.
profit, right?
Yeah, we like the word profit. We like growth, but we don't like quota. No, you have a damn quota. Like whatever that is, you need to spend your money, right? However you're spending it is coming from somewhere. So if I have that $300,000 for sales and marketing this year, I want that sales and marketing going towards writing quotes. That's it. And if it doesn't pay for that VCIO, right, then it needs to come from somewhere else as well, which is your contracts.
Yeah, we the reason we're we're struggling with the concept of the title, which, you know, it's, in my mind, titles are I don't care what you call me. I honestly don't. I have a specific set of tasks that I try to accomplish, but it
Nope, we lost you. Steve, you got muted there somehow.
who should they talk to?
Oh, there
Right.
you are.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we lost
I-
you for a little bit there, Steve.
Oh, yeah, somebody, and I'm in a Zoom meeting, so I forgot to put myself on do not disturb. No, for us, it's really, you're calling me a technical account manager. I'm not a technical account manager, so we were looking for a way to do it, but our account managers, which we call relationship success managers now, are not technical enough to do the heavy lifting that borders vCIO, who can go sit with the C-level and, you know, have a discussion. And even when I deliver a proposal, $100,000 proposal, I've got an ROI, if there's an ROI to be had, or at least a cost differentiation spreadsheet. But in my company, I'm a unicorn. There's nobody who crosses them all.
We all wind up in that situation at some point, but we got to stop there. What we can circle back and continue this conversation. Don't hesitate to send us an email if you guys love this, hate this, want to have more of this, have insights on where we should take this. Hit us up and let us know. But we're gonna get out of here because Marnie's got another meeting, and so do I. So
Sorry.
no, with that, we got to roll. Everybody's got stuff to do. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
Kyle,
Zach.
thanks for
You
coming.
guys. Thank
Have a
you.
good one.
Bye-bye.